Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the A World Turned Upside Down seminar here in Dublin, Ohio. As we welcome our next speaker, he's going to talk a little bit about The Crisis Accelerates, some information about Putin, NATO, and the prospect of European conflicts. So let's welcome Gary Winkleman.
Let's see if he's got a mic. Okay, everybody hear me okay? Yes. Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the attendance of coming to hear Gary Winkleman speak. I changed it up a little bit. We were able to get the PowerPoint fixed. We were going to do a Wink and Woody show, but we changed that because I've got so much information. Everybody has so many questions about what's going on here. This is a serious conversation. I'm going to try to have some fun in here. But look, I don't want to scare anybody, but World War III started a long time ago. All right? Nobody's declared it. We're just containing it until something worse happens here. So that's my official statement. What I thought I'd do, let me introduce myself first of all and some special guests that are here. Gary Winkleman, obviously. I've got a really diverse background. I started out here in Dayton, Ohio, and I'd like to acknowledge the prodigal son has returned 35 years later. I have not seen my folks in 4 years. I want to thank my mom and dad and my sister and Joe for just walking in the door to see the prodigal here. So I try to explain things that I do and what I've done. And it's difficult to explain to people. It's just a very unique story. It's not about me. It's about what God has done. Excuse me, it's kind of touching. So with that, let me just get into this. I need to give you a background on my experience going from Dayton and Indian Lake and Bellefontaine, Ohio, and Bowling Green, Ohio State, to Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. I've got a tremendous background in clinical, and I'm a veterinary technician. Worked in a veterinary clinic. Like to acknowledge Dr. Tim Tillman if he's on live stream or he's probably at the football game. I'd like to know the score. But learned everything I know about medicine from Dr. Tillman. That has led me into, for the last 17 years, I've been a recruiter. That was my witness protection program. I needed to do something that I was a little bit more invisible because when I was in Moscow, we built the American Trade Center. And my partner, after I left because of a threat on my life, an attempt on my life. And then I got back and I was working on some other things and he was assassinated. So I'll get into the whole story, but I just wanted to reach out to my fellow Ohioans. And even though I'm from California right now, I've been around the world. And let's just get into this, and then I want to talk about Putin because he's probably the most dangerous man in the world, next to Obama. Yeah. And I'll just play the card right there. People ask me, well, who do you think the Antichrist is? Well, we're not supposed to look for the Antichrist. We're supposed to be looking for Jesus Christ, right? So I don't want to fall into that trap. Well, is the Antichrist going to be, is he Islamic? Is he going to be Jewish? Boy, that would really be interesting, right? Is he going to be the Pope? You know, what's going on out there? Well, you've heard a lot of talks already about America being the final Babylon, right? Well, if America is the final Babylon, I do know of an Islamic president who wants to be the General Secretary of the UN to run the New World Order. So if there were to be an Islamic Antichrist, I know a good candidate. Okay? Is Putin the Antichrist? Boy, he sure looks like it. Right? But he's probably the Prince of Rush, the King of the East, uniting Asia, signing another natural gas, oil, and pipeline deal last week. What was Obama doing? Climate change? Again? Again? Right? I mean, give me a break. Amnesty? You just had an election, folks. It's the economy, stupid. I mean, we've been saying it's the economy, stupid, since George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. and Dick Cheney. So, If you're yeah, here's a great line. I'll give credit to Rick Warren. I'm a member of Saddleback. I keep it a big secret because Rick Warren takes such a hit for being a megachurch pastor, but he does a lot of really good things. And I go to another church as well, Mariners Church in California, where I study under Dr. Beshore. Dr. Beshore is a PhD, THD, MDiv in eschatology. And so over the last 4 years, that's where I got into Bible prophecy. And the more I learned about it, and the more I connected my life and what I know about geopolitics and the CIA and the KGB and the NSA, we're at war, folks. Don't believe anything on the news. Research it. Follow True News. Some people are asking me about Rick Wiles and True News. Follow it. A good friend of mine is a White House press correspondent. Before I forget this, this is a commercial timeout. I hired Bill Koenig 25 years ago. Bill is White House press correspondent. He has press credentials in Israel and the White House. He stands across eyeball to eyeball with Obama, Netanyahu, and the rest of them every week. He lives in a suitcase between Jerusalem and here. And let me say this, Jerusalem is the epicenter of the world, not the United States of America. Not Washington, D.C., not New York City. The whole world revolves around Jerusalem. And so let me talk about replacement theology. I'm nowhere on my PowerPoint presentation. Replacement theology says that the church replaced Israel. And it's the biggest lie that's ever been told. The Abrahamic covenant is still in force. You divide the land for peace, and there are supernatural reactions around the world, whether or otherwise. And Bill Koenig wrote a book called Eye to Eye and documented that. So my recommendation is watch.org. Remember your wristwatch. Watch.org. You can check his site every day for the free stuff, and he's got a lot of archived articles. But I'd pay the $1 a week, $52 a year. Bill, I want a commission if you're watching this. Go to watch.org and check it every day. There is a paid Friday news subscription for subscribers. That is a Kiplinger letter, 12, 14-page report on everything that's going on in the world. And it's written from a biblical worldview from a guy that's not a kook. Okay? And the rest of the stuff is nonsense. Let me get into my presentation, or I'm never going to get done, and I've been trying to keep people on schedule. They're going to have to come and get a hook. So, okay, let's begin. The crisis accelerates Putin, NATO, and the prospects for European conflicts. It's really the prospects for World War III. The answer is it's going to happen. It is happening. It's already started. Nobody's made it official. It's like UFO disclosures. Nobody's going to believe it until the President of the United States walks out and says, UFOs are for real, folks. We just couldn't tell you. Okay? That's what's going on in our world right now. So let me give you the reasons why I have this point of view. All right. I'm sorry that the pixelation there is a little goofy, and I'm dedicating this presentation to Paul E. Tatum, who was a very good friend of mine, who was assassinated by the mayor of Moscow and the Russian mafia. And I am lucky to still be here today. They made an attempt on my life to send him a message, and fortunately they failed, and I'm back home. But Paul's been dead since 1996. They killed him on November 3rd, the day before the election, when I was working for Jack Kemp, running for Vice President of the United States on the U.S. Committee to Assist Russian Reform. They thought that they could get away with it, that nobody would pay attention to another murder in Moscow with a presidential election and all the hoopla in the press, right? Well, there was one guy that got paged, and within minutes, I called the FBI in Washington, D.C., and within hours, I spent the next 10 days with the FBI and a lot of other people. And I drew a roadmap to the front door of a lot of very high dignitaries in the Russian government and the Russian mafia. And I have been in hiding since. I've really kept it low profile. This is the first time this has ever been out here. I'm going to show you some documentation from the FBI and from the Congress of the United States putting Boris Yeltsin on notice. Okay? So let's go forward. I'm going to skip through this now and make up some time. Paul was a good friend of mine. He hired me as an office building executive. We built the American Trade Center, which I'm going to show you. Well, I'm going to get out of order here. I've not rehearsed this, guys. I had to put this together on the fly. This was my real boss. This is H.R. Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff. H.R. Haldeman was the good soldier in the group of bad guys. Okay? H.R. was just a fantastic gentleman. He was a hotel guy. When he left the White House, he worked for the Pritzker family in Chicago. And he was developing hotels for Pritzker. I was in Newport Beach, California with Grubb and Ellis and a bunch of other commercial real estate firms, and I was taking all the high-rise mixed-use commercial developments, and we just built palaces in Southern California. We took those and put them in Russia where they had nothing. And so that was the partnership with HR. He said, Gary, you're a friend of Paul. He needs a friend here. You're the real estate expert. You need to come here and take this over. Forget those NAFTA maquiladora projects you're working on in San Diego. All right? You guys are going to be the next Donald Trump. You're going to be on the cover of Time magazine. You're going to be billionaires. You'd be crazy to turn this opportunity down. What are you thinking? Yes, sir. Okay, well, that led into a lot of fun things. Yeah, I had hair back then. And Bill always upstaged me. Heck of a guy. Heck of a guy. What can I say? Just bad politics, bad policy. Comes up through the Rhodes Scholarships of Cecil Rhodes. That's the Council of Foreign Relations, which is tied to the IMF, the Federal Reserve, the World Bank, the G20, the IMF, all of it. It's all part of the New World Order elite government, okay? And he's big in it. Before I forget it, if you Google, I didn't say this, I just kind of told you where to look. If you Google Russian mob Clinton, you will find a lot of information of major mafia contributions to the Clintons. So that's going to make my saying that difficult. But it is public information, okay? I would have real reservations about her as the next president of the United States. If this is ever fully investigated properly, okay, it's ridiculous, okay? So I like Bill a lot, but I remember that handshake and I just, hair went up on the back of my neck. I won't say anything about it. What's black and brown that looks good on an attorney? Doberman Pinschers. Speaking of attorneys, you may not know it, but Putin is an attorney. Obama is an attorney. The Congress and the Senate, this whole country is run by attorneys. I'm sorry to the attorneys in the audience. I know there's good ones out there somewhere. Let's keep rolling. This was before I got there. This little guy on the right with President Reagan, this was at the American Trade Center. I came in a year later. Unfortunately, I never got to meet Ronald Reagan. I met a lot of people through Paul. I've met, gosh, who don't all have I met? Dan Quayle, Ted Turner, Charlton Heston. I mean, boy, this guy, Paul was really connected. He was a great fundraiser out of Oklahoma. Actually, at his eulogy, Mary Fallon, the governor of Oklahoma, gave Paul's eulogy several years ago. I didn't know it, but they were high school sweethearts. So, small world. Let's keep going. Oh, this guy, by the way, this is the sidekick that was with Hawaii, what's that guy with the mustache? Tom Selleck. Tom Selleck, what was the TV show that Tom Selleck was in? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. All right, I already told you about Haldeman. That's really between a friendship with Paul and H.R. Haldeman. I mean, how do you turn that job down? Okay, there's Paul Tatum standing there kind of in the middle, Vladimir Dreitzer, Bernie Rome, and then there's H.R. Haldeman, and there's another gentleman in there with white hair that you might recognize. He was on the board. He was an astronaut, Buzz Aldrin. Buzz wasn't stupid. He knew where there was money. He knew where there was a space administration program too. Okay, this is the project that we built. I'm not going to go through all of it. This is just a cover of the environment for business success in Moscow. This was the one stop, you went into Russia and you left the airport, you were on your own. You'd be lucky to find a hotel with really toilet paper, okay? We took Ritz-Carlton in there basically. Actually, Radisson was our partner and I don't even want to talk about them, they were terrible. We tried to replace them with Ritz-Carlton. That was part of the reason Paul was killed. So, these were the quality of the offices. These are Western style offices. And I should say the mandate that we had, this thing is kind of bothering me a little bit, I'm trying to stay on my ear. The mandate that we had is that H.R. Haldeman and Paul Tatum cut a deal with the Soviet in-tourist hotel system. So if you fly if you flew Aeroflot into Russia, anywhere in Russia, Ukraine, or the Baltics, or the CIS, you stayed in one of their hotels. It was all tied together. So our mandate was to take every one of those properties and convert them to Western standards. So that's from Vladivostok to Poland, basically. I should be really rich right now. I'm not. I watched my equity go up in smoke, literally. Okay? So let's keep going. Oh, this gets interesting. This guy right here, Mike Ramsdale, this guy reported to me as one of my part of my executive team. Heck of a guy. He and his wife Bonnie, nice couple, Mormon. Won't get into the Mormon thing. But Christian and loving of Jesus and so forth and so on. I like Mike a lot. He was a good guy. This was in 93, 94, 95. This is a Costco shopping trip in Irvine, California in 2007, December. And I walked by a table and I see a book, and Train to Patevka, and I've been to Russia, and I see that red hammer and sickle on the front of that locomotive, and my grandpa was into those locomotives. And I see Mike Ramsdale, and I go, what? What? So I picked this thing up, and I go, an American spy in Russia? Oh, it couldn't be. Well, it was. So the whole time that this guy is reporting to me, right, building the American Trade Center and doing our thing, he's actually a CIA mole, one of the most famous spies in the history of the United States and Russia. His mission was that we had a little problem. We built an embassy over there, and we awarded these big construction contracts for millions of dollars. And we went to take occupancy of that embassy. The walls had been turned into megaphones. Very sophisticated technology. The whole wall listened to you. Okay? Well, Reagan was pretty upset about that. So basically, Ronald Reagan commissioned the CIA through Mike Ramsdale, put Mike Ramsdale in charge of the operation, to kidnap, which is illegal, kind of like Iran-Contra, to kidnap, and I love Ronald Reagan, don't get me wrong, but technically kidnap these four guys that were Russian mafia and so forth and so on, kidnap them, extract them, get them to The Hague in the Netherlands and put them on trial, which was the right thing to do. It was technically the wrong way to go about it. And to this day, Paul Tatum's files are classified as to who really killed him and why he was killed, because his file is classified an extreme risk to national security. So I can't get to it through any kind of freedom of information. And then, of course, they put the Patriot Act on there. How convenient. So there's a lot going on, folks. All right, let's keep going. Oh, that was a fun day. Jeez. That's right outside my hotel. I'm standing there looking at that. Paul signs a memo and says, Gary, you're in charge. Your signature in this joint venture is good for anything. I'll be back in a couple weeks. I'm going to a board meeting in London. A couple days later, a coup to overthrow Boris Yeltsin. That's right outside the door. I've got 400 rooms rented, 400 hotel rooms. I'm sorry, I don't mean to turn my back to the folks here on the right. But I've got, this is the Duma, this is the Parliament, this is the Russian White House, okay? And that's a T-72 round at point blank range going into granite. And it does devastating damage. And that's what it looks like from the parking lot of the American Trade Center. And that thing looked like a birthday cake that caught on fire on top. There were hundreds of people killed. And my tenants in the building were the BBC, CNN, Tokyo News, et cetera, Reuters. And, when a shell hits a building like that, everything around it reverberates. And, of course, there's all kinds of gunfire and broken windows, and there's shot reporters being drugged back into the lobby of the hotel. So that was a lot of fun. It gets crazier. This is a friend of mine that I meet in Southern California. Actually, I met him through this young lady. She's not Russian. She's an American. She's quite attractive. She was my fiance at that time. And Marie, her aunt, dated this guy. So he says, well, I want to check this guy out, make sure he's a good guy. So I went over and did a barbecue at the house and so forth and so on. He checked me out and thought I was a pretty good guy. Well, we became good friends. But when the Russian White House was being blown up, that's who I called. This is Ed Dearborn, and I'm not going to say a lot about this because I shouldn't. Ed is, this has to do with Putin. This has to do with oil and gas pipelines. It has to do with the CIA. It has to do with overthrowing governments like in Ukraine right now and other places. This man has been, he left, he went into Vietnam before Vietnam. He left Korea. This guy got a Purple Heart. My dad could tell me what battle this was in, but when there was like 4 Marines that survived in the morning when the daylight came up, and there were 4 guys on top of the hill, that's one of the guys. Then he went to Vietnam before Vietnam was even on anybody's map. Okay? I mean, he ran the whole thing. He also ran the Iran-Contra thing. His pilot, Gene Hockenfuss, was shot down and captured, and that's how the Iran-Contra scandal occurred. Somebody had a little black book on him that had all the names of all the other agents. Should have eaten the book, didn't eat it. So Ed is, what would we call him today? Blackwater, a contractor. In the old days, we called him mercenaries. He's a good friend of mine. I called him. And within 3 days, he came in through Istanbul, Turkey, and he guarded me through that insurrection. We were under a curfew in Moscow for 2 or 3 weeks, so it was quite a scary time. But I owe my life to that guy and that girl that said, his famous words to me were, Gary, Paul is going to get you killed. A bouncing grenade has no friends. You need to get the hell out of here. He knew something I didn't know, and he was right. So I digress. Let me keep going. Now, I did leave after some attempts on my life and so forth and so on. Paul had not been killed yet. I came back and I took a job. This is, on the far side, is Mr. Tom Kemp. Tom is deceased now. This is the U.S. Committee to Assist Russian Reform, and Tom Kemp Jr. on the right, great friend of mine to this day. And at that time, we had the U.S. Committee to Assist Russian Reform. It was through Pepperdine University, USAID funding, and we were trying to take all the Russian factories and convert them from military, the military-industrial complex, convert them to civilian jobs. That was our mandate, and that's what I was doing the day that Paul Tatum was killed. The day that went down happened to be November 3rd, the day before the election. The day after I resigned, and I said, I am not going to let them get away with murder. I'm going after them, and I need some help. So the Kemp family helped. This is my good friend Paul Tatum. He looks pretty good there compared to what he looked like laying on the street. He walked out of the hotel, went over to get on the Kievsky metro. A guy pulled up in a Lada, jumped out, Kalashnikov, auto, 2 or 3 rounds to the back of the head, rest of them in the torso. And it was a crowded stairwell like the number of people in here. Not a round missed Paul. That is a professional hit. Professional hit. So Haldeman was right. We made the cover of Newsweek, Time magazine. It just wasn't exactly what we had in mind. That 45 on his bodyguard, after they made the attempt on my life, I had one of my own for quite a while. And I didn't take my sport coat off. This is where the Kemps really helped me out. Chris Cox was the congressman. You note the date, November 8th of 1996, and I can actually, you can read that letter better than I can. This one, it's hard to read this little screen. This one is to the Congress of the United States, Honorable Louis Freeh, Director of the FBI, and it basically says, if you don't bring the killers to justice, yeah, I'm going to lose this. It's just basically implicating the mayor of Moscow, Umar Dobravilov, one of my tenants in the building, who was a Chechen mafia guy. And it says specifically Yuri Lushkov, the mayor of Moscow. What it's not saying is Boris Yeltsin, but nothing happens in Moscow without somebody approving it. This is like Pontius Pilate washing his hands and saying, I find no sin in this man. That's what happened here. Yeltsin washed his hands and said, I find no sin in Paul Tatum. So the mayor went about his business with a guy that was a tenant in the building, and they put a contract out on Paul. This is another letter. It got pretty serious. This is November 18th. It's not far after the assassination, to Boris Yeltsin from some people you might know. There's John Boehner in there, who was then co-chair of the House Republican Committee, Newt Gingrich, Dick Armey, Tom DeLay, Chris Cox, Gerald Solomon. Notice the CC to Secretary of State Christopher and the FBI Director Louis Freeh. So, high crimes and misdemeanors, they occur in a lot of places. There's the guy that I think did it. He was one of my tenants in the building. This is a recent photo of him back in '09. I haven't seen him since I left Moscow in '94, and I don't want to. But he was a senator in the Duma, their parliament, and he quit early. He's got so much money he doesn't know what to do with. There's where my equity went. That's where my and Paul equity went. And Radisson has hotels all over Moscow now, all over the country. They're multi-billionaires. So bad luck. Let's talk about Putin, the purpose of you coming in here today. Putin's a bad guy. I like Putin a lot. And but as a guy, I mean, he's got a lot of testosterone going on there. He doesn't wear mommy jeans and ride a little girly bike. Who would you rather have a beer with? I mean, what's not to like here, right? Well, there's a lot of problems with all of this. This is Gary Kasparov. If there's a guy that you want to follow right now in the press, it's Gary Kasparov. He's the famous chess master. Gary is a political activist. He'd like to get rid of Putin. He'd like to see the country return to less of a dictatorship or a mafia state, because basically the system of government that you have in Russia, whether it was under Yeltsin but now under Putin, is a mafia state. Now, be careful, because what we have in the United States right now isn't far removed. Okay? But right now, Putin is the most dangerous and wealthiest man in the world for a couple of reasons. He's not afraid of the KGB. He rules the KGB. He doesn't worry about the parliament, the Duma, or any of the rest of these people. He runs that country, lock, stock, and barrel. Now, what makes it unique is he doesn't answer to anybody. Well, the last time that happened, we had an Adolf Hitler, didn't we? Right? And what's really interesting is in the old system, I'm going to pause here, and I'll come back to Gary. But in the old system, at least under Yeltsin, there were oligarchs. In other words, everybody got super rich. If they were friends of Yeltsin or friends of Putin, they took over railroads, oil and gas, coal, whatever. You're my buddy, you're my pal, you're in the family, you're extremely rich. You have control. Well, now, under Putin, he's basically eliminated a lot of them, and it's just him. It's a very closed circle. Very, very few people. Haldeman said to me, Gary, Russia was great for a few. Russia was great for a few. That's biblical, right? To those who have, there are the haves and have-nots. To those who have, they'll have more and more. To those who don't have, they'll have less and less. Well, that's us. We're having less and less as the new less and less middle class. So, interesting parallels. There's similarities and dissimilarities between the two. And there's a video that I did not have time to put in here or play, but you want to watch it. It's called The Putin System. Putin System, free on YouTube. You will not sleep well. And you definitely want to watch it. Gary Kasparov is going to be quite outspoken. Follow him in the press, please. He's blowing the whistle on what's really going on in Russia, etc. Kings of the East. I put the type in here. This was an article, Kings of the East, what the rise of Vladimir Putin means for Asia and the world. Well, a lot of people say, is he the Prince of Rosh or is he the Antichrist? I'm going to leave that up to you, but if you start doing the research, he's a good candidate. Okay? This guy just left Asia and walked out of there with another huge Gazprom oil and gas contract. Now, you need to understand in his system that all state resources belong to him, not Russia. So he can go out and trump his chest and say, I want Russia to be great again. We want all these countries back. We want to be, the big guys on the block. Yeah, there's some machismo there. He rides around without a shirt. I know some beaners in California that do that. Big deal. But he owns Gazprom. Gazprom. And we're going to show you what that means. But that means that the oil and gas that belongs to the Russian people, when it comes out of the ground and goes through pipelines and comes out the other side, there's a meter drop. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. It goes into his personal piggy bank and his friends' personal piggy banks. These are the richest people in the world. And here it is. I apologize, I got some new glasses. I'm having a hard time reading this screen. But pipeline geopolitics, major turnaround, Russia, China, Iran, redraw the energy map. Again, this oil and gas network is all over the place. And this leads to something I'm going to show you. And I think this is it. Ezekiel 38:4. All right? What are the hooks in the jaws that turn Magog and Gog around and attack and invade Israel? Why would they do that? Well, let me show you. I'm in the medical business. Consider this an x-ray of your jaw. And I had to wire your jaw. Well, on the outside, it looked fine. But what you can't see is all the wire holding my jaw together. Well, I just took an x-ray of the land. And I could do this in Iran, Iraq, Syria, but I did Ukraine, because what are we arguing about? Crimea and the Ukraine. Everybody's worried about it, all right? Well, the wire are the gas pipelines in red. They are all bottlenecked from Russia through the Ukraine to go to Europe, all right? That's the distribution pipeline. That's money, people. That's billions and billions of dollars. Now, Putin, when he invaded, well, we back up how this happened. You remember Armenia and Georgia, the Chechens, and the massive killings? Well, there was a lot that said that the Islam, most of this world is Islamic, by the way, that they came into Moscow and started terrorizing and blowing up apartment buildings. What's really going on here is that Putin, in a red flag operation, a false flag operation, hired Chechens to blow up apartment buildings, and then Putin made that very same guy the president of Ukraine. Or, I'm sorry, president of Georgia. President of Georgia. Okay? So that was mass genocide that was going on back in those days. But did the Europeans do anything about it? Did NATO do anything about it? Why didn't they do anything about it? I love the JFK Oliver Stone line. Who had the most to gain? Who had the most to lose? Follow the money. Follow the money. There's nothing new under the sun, Solomon said, right? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Okay? These pipelines are critical all over the Middle East. Now, oil gets shipped on tankers, so you have to worry about submarines. Why was Crimea so important? Crimea was important because the Russians have one of their very largest submarine bases in Crimea. Okay? Strategically, militarily, very, very important. Aside from the pipelines. But they didn't have to go down there and take that little island down there, that little peninsula of Crimea. They went down there to get that because of the submarine bases. Okay? So, the Europeans are not they're not condemning Putin because they're worried about freezing to death in about a month. They don't want their oil and gas cut off. Now, Bill Salas made an interesting point the other day. He says, yeah, Israel, and they've discovered all this oil and gas. Yeah, they have. They've got a lot of gas offshore. They got oil in Negev, and there's some interesting things that God is doing in that part of the world. But you're still going to have to transport that by ships because there aren't pipelines there. That brings submarines back into play, doesn't it? Okay? Now, pipelines are pretty vulnerable. A lot of James Bond movies have blown up pipelines with pretty girls going through them and Bond going, Russians are involved in those movies too. Those are strategic targets. I mean, if I was going to attack Russia and I was a CIA Pentagon planner, I might want to hire my friend Ed Dearborn and go out and blow up some pipelines. And if those pipelines ever went away, there'd be a big demand to get the oil and gas out of Israel, wouldn't there? So the hooks in the jaw might be the dental work that I see that's going on in the Middle East. Okay? So I'm going to go to Bill Salas and see if he and I can work on a book on that. Because it's huge. This gets into a little bit more of this. And I forgot the story of Azerbaijan. Ed Dearborn. Ed came into the hotel one night, took care of me, disappeared. A few days later, I picked up the Moscow Times, and there's a story about a group of soldiers that were attacked in the middle of the night. 2,000 or 3,000 were killed. Well, it was all about this pipeline right here that you see coming out of Azerbaijan to the west, toward Turkey. We were assisting, military advisors, I think they're called. We were assisting in building that pipeline to get the oil and gas out of the Caspian region of Azerbaijan and Georgia and Turkey to get it to Europe. And that's the last thing Putin would want to have happen, because now you're competing with Putin or Yeltsin, right? Whoever was in charge at that time. So it's about oil and gas and pipelines and distribution. And this shows you the rest of the world, the rest of Europe, Africa, the Middle East. Those are all Gazprom pipelines. Those are, in my opinion, the hooks in the jaws. We'll see what happens. That's my opinion only, okay? All right, let's keep going. What happened last week in China at this big summit? Well, gosh, what was he wearing? Where were the wardrobe police? Is that somebody, first he curtsies to the Saudi, you know, and then he goes to China acting like, what, was he thinking he was Mandela? Please, go be the President of the United States. Stand up, wear a suit, be a man, grow some. This is what he walked out of there with. This is what Putin walked out with, is another multi-billion-dollar contract for Gazprom. These are the existing and future gas pipelines that are now being built between the Soviet Union and China. Which reminds me of Zygmunt Brzezinski real quick, and I'm not a big fan. I think he's as bad as Henry Kissinger. But he is right about one thing. And maybe that's what Kissinger's play was with Nixon back in the 70s when I didn't know what was going on. The only counterbalance that we've got is to make nice again with China. Because we're in a world of hurt. Because both Bill Clinton and this president have dismantled our military. Now, we're still the most powerful military, but we're not nearly what we need to be, especially going up to what these guys, because they've rearmed. They're a huge military might, and their nuclear capability is way past the United States. Okay? So let me keep going, or I'm not going to get done. This is Bill. Actually, this is Mark Langfan. You can watch his YouTube demonstration of this for free. This is called the Black Gold Triangle, and here's what's significant about this little part of the world. This gets a little bit away from pipelines, but the importance of oil and gas. What you're looking at is 53% of the world's oil supply within that triangle. 1/3 to Iraq, which Obama has given to Iran. Iran has the other third, which means they have 2/3 of the 53% of the world's oil supply right now. But they're greedy. They want all of it. So this little area over here, this other third on this south shore, Bahrain, Qatar, Doha, etc., that's what they're after. How are you going to get that? Well, here's how you do that. Iran wants a nuclear weapon. You don't need a lot of them. You only need one. All right? So Mark Langfan, Bill Koenig, and others say, look, these guys are going to get a nuclear bomb. They're going to go down and launch a missile off of some ship down there over this side of the desert. They don't have to get it very high, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet. You don't have time to shoot it down. It detonates, and it sets off an electromagnetic pulse that knocks out CENTCOM's ability to defend the Saudi royal family. Now you have 100% control of 53% of the world's oil supply, and you are a nuclear power with an attitude that has sworn to the elimination of Israel, who happens to be our ally, I think. I'm not sure. I thought Iran was, I haven't seen the paper couple. Is Iran our new ally? What's his middle name anyway? I think it is Hussein. I'm gonna say this. This is why I'm at a forum and I am not a 501(c) nonprofit ministry. My middle name is Dietrich, and I love Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A pastor, a spy, a martyr, right? The one man that stopped Adolf Hitler was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But by not being a nonprofit, I'm not going to worry about him coming in and shutting off my microphone. Okay? This is a mess. You know, this election thing was not about race, and I am not a racist. I have a lot of friends. I see a black gentleman right here. You have a very noble black persona to you. Where are you from? Nigeria. Great country. Great country. I'm not a racist. I'm not an anti-Semitic. In fact, I'm so pro-Israel, I'd rather live there than I'd rather live than live here right now. I didn't want to go to Vietnam, but I would volunteer to go volunteer in the IDF. I would defend Israel to the hilt because it's the only place to be. So, Our election and our president was not about a race. It was a deception, ladies and gentlemen. They played the race card to elect, quote unquote, a black president. Look, I've studied genetics in high school in Ohio. A white female and a black male produce what? Is it a black man or a white man? Mama was white, daddy was black. It's not a black man per se. Right? But the press doesn't want you to talk about that. You know, wait, they're equal. Egg, sperm, 50-50 deal, folks. It wasn't 51-49. It was 50-50. It's genetics, okay? I don't care about your race or your skin color. What I care about is your world view. I care about your belief system. Chris Putnam's sitting back here, and Chris has got it right. It's all about the supernatural worldview. The biblical worldview is the correct worldview. You can study Buddhism, Hinduism, Mormonism, Catholicism. You study it all. A guy that destroys the Quran, Dr. Nabil Qureshi, who works with Dr. Ravi Zacharias, some of the best apologetics in the world, right? This young man can stand up in front of a university with no notes, and he can stand up here and he can talk about every verse in the Bible, the Quran, and the Hadith from memory. And he's a Christian. He's a young medical doctor. He's an American, all right? And he can destroy the Quran and the Hadith. So I crossed that one off my list. Islam's got to go bye-bye. And while I'm at it, that God that I worship in my country that's on my dollar bill is not Yahweh. It is Osiris. It is Nimrod. And I'm probably leaving somebody out. Okay? But that's the deception of what's going on with our Federal Reserve, which is not a federal agency for those in the audience that think that the Federal Reserve is a government institution. It is a cabal of private bankers that rule the world. Okay. I am going to get shot now. This was the fun side of Paul. This is Paul after I had resigned. I said, Paul, you're going to get me killed. I'm out of here, man. He says, you ain't going anywhere. I got a paper bag in my desk. What's it going to take? You're coming back to Moscow. And I said, nope. All the money in the world doesn't do me any good, Paul. You get me killed, I'm done. We did have some fun. This was the Metro Golden Mare opening of our new American cinema, because there's no cinema in Moscow. And so we had a gala event. We live streamed in Samuel Golden Mare, and we did the Shakespearean thing, Much Ado About Nothing. Paul's on the right. A flight attendant friend visited from California, and we were having a party, but then somebody walked in. Now, this is Lena Kondalainen, and she really got my eye, and she, things happen. I got a date, but things happen. I met Elena, and I went to her Academy Award. She's the Madonna, Marilyn Monroe of Moscow film, in over 40 or 50 movies, and there's a long story behind that. It was a lot of fun. So we did have a good time, and we were changing the world for the better, but we ran into some problems. I love the Russian people. I mean, if we could get our governments out of the way, this little lady is no different than the people in this audience, right? They're fantastic people. They love us as much as we love them. And I'm on live stream, and I want to say hello to Andrei Furmanov. Andrei is in Vyborg, Russia, and St. Petersburg watching. He's a pastor over there. He's a good friend of ours. You can listen to an interview with Doug Woodward, myself, and Andrei on our Prophecy Forum website. And he feels the same way about Putin as we feel about Obama, and vice versa. Okay? Gotta hurry. Just a couple quick candid shots just to say I really was there. I'm not kidding. And this is Paul. Notice the date? This date was planned, ladies and gentlemen, for a professional contract hit by the Russian government and the mafia. They didn't want to risk the most successful joint venture in the history of Russia and the United States, other than the space program. Okay? Americom Business Centers was that venture. They made some attempts on my life before this happened. It's easier to get rid of friend of founder than it is to get rid of founder. That's gonna draw a lot of attention. Okay? So that's pretty much the slide presentation. And you know what? I'd like to just maybe open it up to a couple of questions. I've got about, how much time have I got? I can't hear you. I guess I feel like I'm back in the KGB or the CIA. I got so many years. 10? 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
How much time do you think we have before they lower the hammer? Because they're ready to go with this thing.
Okay, say that again for me, please. Well, can I borrow that mic? Thank you, sir. This is David. David has done just a heck of a job on our live stream and everything. Thank you, folks. Thank you. Go ahead.
How long do you think we have before they lower the hammer, since they're all at the G20 summit and they're finalizing everything?
Okay. Did everybody hear that? Well, she wants to know how soon until everybody lowers the hammer, because they're at the G20 summit and, finalizing their deals. Listen, the story about the G20. The G20 is made up of 20 bankers from the top 20 economies of the world that control the International Bank of Settlements. International Bank of Settlements was set up by a guy that reported to Hitler and Reinhard Gehlen. I'm sorry, Himmler. Hitler, Himmler, Reinhard Gehlen. Reinhard Gehlen and a guy in the United States by Alan Dulles established the International Bank of Settlements. That's where they do all the laundering of money. Basically, we exported Nazi Germany and all of their wealth when the war was ending. And I wanted Doug Woodward for this part, because Doug writes about this. I want you to buy Power Quest 1 and 2 out there, because this is Doug's research. Basically, they exported, how much time? We're good? Okay. They exported all the wealth of Germany to kind of, it was a survival plan of Nazism. When the Russians took half and we took the other half, we brought 16,000 Nazi war criminals into the United States under Project Paperclip, where Truman had an executive order and said, no, you're not bringing those guys in. Yeah, we want their technology, blah, 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 but no war criminals are going to be allowed in. So what they did is they created a false resume, a false dossier, and they paperclipped it. Now, there was somebody that was in control of those documents, by the way. This will scare you, and not a lot of people know this. Which one works better? This one? Okay. There was a young clerk that Alan Dulles hired in the Department of Justice. His name was Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was in charge of those 16,000 files. This was top secret classified information until just a couple of years ago. There was a 50-year limit on this stuff. Well, there are a lot of researchers that go through this stuff as it becomes available. Okay. You wonder why you got a problem with Eric Holder? Okay. Corruption in our government structures is terrible. Our State Department might as well be working for the other guys. Mr. Chaos, John Kerry. Okay. The agenda that's being put forth by the elite is a new world order. They want a one world government. They want to get rid of religion, and they want to get rid of the fighting of nations and unify it all under what? The one world government. One religion, can't you all just get along? What is your problem? What are these faith people, right? I mean, that's basically it. And we want a one world currency. I mean, the war that's going on, what they're battling about at the G20 is currency wars. Who's going to win? You have the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And of course, there was a secret document. I didn't have time to put this article up. Secret document that was signed recently with Putin and some others, where they're trying to pull in India, Pakistan, and other countries into that group. They're trying to break the petrodollar, because the law states right now, the way things are set up, you have to buy oil and pay for it with US dollars. Well, Islam does not want Rockefeller or Rothschild or JP Morgan or Carnegie or any of those bankers to be their banker. They're not stupid. They know about this. Okay? So they just circumvent it and pay with the gold. They just barter it. There's not much time. There's lots of stuff that's really going down in play. Yeah, there's a lot. It's a very strange phenomenon with all the dead bankers. She asked about all the dead bankers. There were quite a few were thrown out of windows, jumped out of windows, jumped in front of trains, and so forth and so on. Who knows? Who really knows? I mean, how are you ever going to prove this? Look, Gans Shamiro talked about it this morning on the Secret Space Program. Over 50% of U.S. history is classified. Paul Tatum's file is extreme risk to national security. What the hell's in there? Excuse me. Right? And I'm telling you, you Google the influence of Mark Rich. Oh, here's a good one. I'm probably just about out of time. Article just I saw this week. I didn't have time to put it into anything. Remember the pardon of Mark Rich? What did Mark Rich do? Well, Mark Rich was in the metals business. Metals business of what? Aluminum. Whose aluminum? Russian mafia aluminum. He's the biggest dealer of aluminum in the world and the biggest sponsor of Bill and Hillary Clinton. Okay? The problem was everybody else wanted in on that game, and a bunch of the other oligarchs in that system were also contributing. So we have a problem with campaign finance reform. Who's buying your president? You're not checking that box for $2 on your tax return, folks. Right? But there's some other guys who are writing some very big checks. Let me tell. I'm going to wrap up with this story. I want to say hello to Rick and Robin. Robin Tatum Furmanek is in Gilbert, Arizona. They know I'm here. I don't know if they live streamed this or not. They didn't want to talk about this. But in 1999, Berezovsky, who was killed in March of this year, that's why I can talk about this. Berezovsky came to Paul Tatum's sister and said, we want to do a documentary. Do you mind if we interview? I just thought about it and prayed about it and said, okay, yeah, we'll do that. So they got done with the documentary, and they said, well, we want to thank you for allowing us to do this and to use the documentary. And they said, is there anything that we could do for the Tatum family? You know, we know that losing Paul and, you know, lots of debts. Paul was in, his parents had collateralized some loans to start this American Trade Center. Well, when he was assassinated and Americom went down, Umar took it over, as did the mayor of Moscow, and it was shut down, and they absconded all of our equity, all of our assets, etc. Well, Rick said, yeah, you know, actually there's some expenses, and, you know, it's not a lot of money, $25, $30, $40, $50,000, whatever. And they said, okay, I'll tell you what, this will be untraceable, but there will be money that will appear in Ed and Millie's bank account, and you will not be able to trace it. And we'll take care of some things. So they left, and they went back to Moscow, and for the entire election season, this interview of Robin and Rick played on Russian television 24 hours a day on a particular channel. It basically prevented Yuri Lushkov from running for president. Okay? And it set up Putin to succeed Yeltsin. So in a way, hey, I kept Yuri from being president. Right? But what good does it do? But that just goes to show the money showed up in the bank account. I'm not going to disclose the amount of money. Okay? But there were some people very sympathetic to what Paul tried to do to renovate Russia and turn it around into a democracy, Christianity, ethics, rule of law, commerce, freedom. The Russian people yearn for this, folks. We are living in more of a dictatorship, really, than they are. And they'll be the first to tell you. All you got to do, look up Andrei Furmanov. Look at his Facebook page. Look at some of the things he posts. Listen to the Prophecy Forum website interview of that. We out of time?
You've got two more. Go ahead. One more
Okay.
question.
Any other questions? Oh, Benghazi. Jesus. Come, Jesus. Benghazi, when the truth gets out on Benghazi, if it ever gets out, of course, we have a corrupt DOJ that's protecting Hillary. It's a bad arms deal. Look, guys. Our two economies, Russia and the United States, were built around the military-industrial complex. That's it. Eisenhower's famous last words on black and white TV, watch it on YouTube. He's addressing the American people, and he at the end of his speech, he basically says, and the last thing I want to say to the American people is, beware of the military-industrial complex. Took his glasses off, folded them, put them in his pocket, said good night and God bless. You can watch that. John F. Kennedy. What did John F. Kennedy do? He did three things. He made some bad friends. First of all, my dad, sitting up here, is a Korean War veteran, U.S. Navy on the Essex and Laity. Thank you. Thank you. He doesn't talk much about it. I have to find things out on the internet. My dad was a plane captain and an aviation electrician, and he hung out with some pretty bad dudes. I had a squadron of Corsairs in Korea, a famous story about Thomas Hudner, who won the Medal of Honor, and Jesse Brown. Jesse Brown was a black aviator in the U.S. Navy and one of the best. He got shot, ditched his plane in the snow in a canyon in these mountains. The Corsairs circled around and shot the Koreans to keep them away. His cockpit was on fire. His legs were trapped in the cockpit. Hudner crash landed his plane adjacent, got out and tried to get Jesse out. They were unsuccessful. Jesse died. Hudner received the Medal of Honor. He got a thorough dressing down, probably from the ship commander, for wasting another good Corsair. But this man sacrificed his life and the squadron, they were not going to leave their guy behind. So that's very proud of that. Excuse me. So since I'm a Navy baby, about 4 years ago, I went and got my private pilot's license. So it's for you. What was I going to say? Benghazi. Oh, my. Okay. The military-industrial complex, what John Kennedy did. The first thing he did is my dad was recruited into the Bay of Pigs. I was 8 years old. You talk about attacks from Satan. My dad blames Jesus. I blame Satan. I'm going to reframe that for him today because I'm on a rescue mission to save him. My mom and dad met in a church choir. Fell in love, been married 62 years, I think. God, I'm the cause, right? So, but my dad was he was a stud, man. I mean, he grew some. He liked Hemingway, right? And he liked the war. And basically, what happened was he got recruited by the CIA into the Bay of Pigs. Thankfully, he didn't go. The money was wire transferred, I think, or set up to go into my mom's bank account. After that, the house burned down, mysteriously. Blamed on electrical fire. I don't believe that. We're going to talk about that. 2 years later, I'm back in Dayton, Ohio, living at the grandparents'. They're getting back on their feet, and President Kennedy was assassinated. He was assassinated because he went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, never again will you start a war and circumvent the president, let alone the Congress and the Senate. Because you did it with Allen Dulles. They basically did it with Allen Dulles as head of the CIA in co-opting the Joint Chiefs. That was number one. Second was the Federal Reserve. He signed an executive order. He was going to close the Federal Reserve and the private bankers. He said, I don't want to go into Vietnam where you arms dealers are going to continue to make huge money building helicopters, machine guns, and whatever, right? So Kennedy did a lot of things that made a lot of enemies very quickly. But I will say this. Kennedy learned on the job. Kennedy went in green as goodoo, and he learned on the job. But with Obama, as Alan Klein said, is in the amateur, what's the problem here? Is he naive? Is he learning on the job? Or is he diabolical? Right? Right? So like I said, there are candidates out there, and I'm not going to speculate. I don't want to go off that deep bridge, right? We won't know who the Antichrist is. But we know what the archetype is, don't we? So I've got to cut it off. I'm getting waved off. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.